myself, we have one that has not made her way up because she will be our second presenter. So if you guys want to go ahead.
Tanya Silky.
Escrow officer, commercial escrow officer, and residential escrow officer.
Oh, I have to follow that. Amy Drennan, area manager for Western for Lane County and Douglas County. So thank you all for being here today.
And we'll say yeah to you too.
Oh, yeah.
Amy Corey, and I am a sales rep here at Western Title and am a sales rep for the commercial team. And then I don't know if our other two sales reps.
I don't see them. They probably.
We have Cheyenne and Rick as well. They were greeting everybody, so you probably saw them as you came in.
What's your Amy too?
Yeah. We are very excited to present you two CEs today. We will start off the first one with the Lane County Economic Update with Mr. Brian Rooney. And then we will have some share time as well, grab some more food. We'll have some share time, introduce each other, and talk about some projects we have going on here in Lane County right now. And then at 3 o'clock, I think we may have some additional people joining us for the second CE, and that will be Seller Finance, presented by Jolene. So first of all, we have Mr. Rooney, who has been employed with the Oregon Employment Department for the past 26 years, first as a workforce analysis and now as a regional economist station in Eugene. Previous to the Oregon Employment Department, Mr. Rooney worked as an analysis for ICF International, an engineering and economic consulting firm. Mr. Rooney is responsible for covering the economic conditions for Douglas and Lane counties. His duties include making estimates of current employment by industry and contributing to the estimate of unemployment rates. He also produces and distributes a wide variety of additional economic information, including industry employment forecasts, wage and income data, and demographic stats. He's a graduate of Oregon State with a master's degree in economics and of George Washington University with a bachelor's degree in economics. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Amy.
Yeah,
I should make a short version of that.
That's okay.
I want the long version or the short version. Okay, so let's get going. I'm Brian Rooney, Regional Economist for the Employment Department. I cover Lane and Douglas counties. Today I'm going to talk about employment and unemployment trends, labor availability, housing affordability, and we have new forecasts that came out a couple of weeks ago. So employment and unemployment during the ongoing recovery from pandemic recession losses. So we're going on 4 years coming out of this pandemic recession, and we're still feeling some of the effects from that, especially with inflation and interest rates. The labor market is starting to get into equilibrium, and we may be going into a new normal as far as that goes. A lot of the recovery from the recession has happened, but we'll take a look at that. Okay, so this is total employment, seasonally adjusted for Lane County. Lane County and the Eugene MSA are one and the same. Lane County is yet to reach pre-pandemic employment levels. So if we look at this chart, we can see the Great Recession is that big bow around 2010, and we came out of there in pretty good shape, way above the pre-recession peak. In the spring of 2020, the bottom dropped out. So those are the pandemic restrictions. We came back very strong, but just like the beginning of this year, we started leveling off, and for the past couple of months, employment's been dropping on a seasonally adjusted basis. It's similar for Oregon statewide, but Oregon statewide reached its pre-pandemic level in January of 2023. But recently, employment has been up 1 month, down the next. So things are slowing up a little bit. So Lane County lost a little over 26,000 or 16% of its jobs in the spring of 2020, and it gained back 21,000 or 81% of what was lost by November, this past November. And as I said, Oregon statewide lost 14% in the spring of 2020. So was hurt a little bit more. I mean, Lane County was hurt a little bit more than statewide, but statewide we gained back 109% of what was lost by November 2023. And we topped pre-pandemic levels statewide in January of 2023. So some industries have lagged coming out of the pandemic recession. First of all, the goods producing industries here at the top, mining and logging, construction, and manufacturing, weren't affected very much by the pandemic restrictions, not as much as the services. So they had kind of an easier time coming out of the pandemic to regain their pre-pandemic levels. So these are more structural moves than based on anything that happened during the pandemic. So we go on down, retail trade, hurt by the pandemic, has come back somewhat, but long-term retail trade is kind of on a downhill slope, slow losses. And that's because of people buying things on the internet. So we're seeing some shift from retail trade to transportation and warehousing. So people aren't going to the store buying things, they're buying them online. And then that takes some of that employment from retail, puts it into warehousing and transportation. Financial activity has done very well coming out of the pandemic recession. This is real estate, property management, insurance is in there, and insurance has been doing pretty well coming out of the pandemic. So professional and business services, in Lane County, we've got a lot of call centers. And first of all, we've seen some outsourcing at call centers. We've also seen technology take away from some of the call center employment. You type in a chat now. But also, with the call centers, people are working from home. So instead of having a centralized location here in Lane County, people are getting spread out, and some of them aren't in Lane County. So we lose that number of employment. In fact, a lot of those people are now just coded statewide, because we really don't know where they are. So it's not counted as employment in Lane County anymore. So the call centers are one of the things that are bringing professional business services down. Private education and health services, that's almost all health services. And health services was hit pretty hard during the pandemic, and then there were labor issues coming out of the pandemic. We lost a lot of people, and then it was a very difficult situation in healthcare during and shortly after the pandemic. So it was hard to get people back. They were having a hard time hiring people back. Leisure and hospitality. Actually, leisure and hospitality got above its pre-pandemic level recently, and it's gone back down. It's a very volatile and seasonal industry, so not too worried about that one. And the same thing with other services. Other services is a real mishmash of companies. It's everything from auto mechanics to hairdressers, religious organizations are in there, your YMCA is in there. It's other services. It's like we didn't have any place else to put them, so we put them in other services. But that, I wouldn't worry about that one either. It's coming back. Government is up. All of that is in local government. The public schools, including the University of Oregon, are not quite back to pre-pandemic levels in that bar. But non-education local government is up. There's a lot of funding coming from the feds and the state. And it comes down to the local level, and that's where it needs to be actualized. So we're seeing some employment growth in local government because of that. Okay, so most industries continue to add jobs. So this is over the year employment growth. Before we were looking at employment growth pre-pandemic to the current. Now we're looking at what's happened over the past year. So construction's been doing well. Manufacturing's down a little bit. We had those losses at Arcimoto, but manufacturing's doing okay. Retail trade continues its slow slide downward. And here's professional and business services. Again, there's losses at call centers there. And also staffing firms are in there. And we're seeing a little less demand for staffing services lately. And I'm thinking that it's because employers are able to do recruitment online more easily. So we're seeing staffing agencies not losing a whole lot of jobs, but it's not as much demand as we had seen there before. Private education and health services is finally coming back very strong. Leisure and hospitality, other services, they're coming back. And in government, as I said before, the public schools are not back to pre-pandemic levels, but they're gaining, they're growing, as is other local government. So the recovery has been uneven across counties in Oregon. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason here. The lighter colored counties are slower recovery. So they're 89% recovered or less. The middle kind of blue is 90% to 100%, and then the other ones are more jobs than before the recession. So one thing that happened is that rural counties weren't as affected by the pandemic restrictions. So it was a little easier for them to come back. But still, we're seeing some rural counties that haven't come back. And we're seeing some urban counties that haven't come back. So a lot of it just depends on your industry mix and actually individual companies that you have and how well they're doing within your county. And here's the list of the 23 counties that are above pre-pandemic levels. And they're largely rural, but there's a real mix of rural and urban in there. Unemployment rates are near record lows. So we can see, this is kind of the inverse of the employment chart. So we can see unemployment rates went up during the Great Recession, came down as employment grew, and then there's the pandemic and unemployment rate shot up, came down rapidly with the employment growth after the pandemic, and now we're back down near record lows. Lane County's November 23 rate was 3.8%. That's down from 5.2% in November 22, and down from a high of 14.7% in April 20, spring of 2020. Lane County's record low rate, 3.5%, set in December 2019, back down there. Oregon's statewide rate was 3.6% in November, and the U.S. rate was 3.7% in November. So again, we're back down to near record low unemployment rates. Oregon unemployment rates by county. So we're starting to get back to a more traditional scenario where rural areas have higher unemployment rates and urban areas have lower rates. And the main reason for that is there's just more opportunity in urban areas. There's just more jobs. So if you lose a job, you can pick one up faster. If you lose a job in a rural area, it could take you a while to get another job. So there just tends to be a longer wait between the time you lose a job and the time you get another one between rural and urban areas. During the pandemic, it was the opposite. As I said before, a lot of the rural areas weren't as affected by the pandemic restrictions. So they had lower unemployment rates, whereas the urban areas, especially around Portland, but including Lane County, had higher rates just because the restrictions were more strict where there's more people in the urban areas. There's a couple of unique things happening in Central Oregon there. So Frick County has the highest seasonally adjusted unemployment rate at 5.7%. And historically, that's a pretty low rate, especially for a rural area. They have they got a data center out there, and it takes a lot of employment to set them up and get them going, but once they're going, they pretty much run themselves, so they have layoffs, and that helped bring up their unemployment rate. And then just to the north there is Wheeler County, and they had the lowest unemployment rate at 2.8%. This is kind of a unique situation. It's very sparsely populated. I think there's like 1,500 souls out there, and it's a high age group. The median median age is 56. So there's a lot of retired folks out there, a lot of self-employment. I think it's just a quarter of the labor force is in self-employment. And they actually grew by 30 jobs over the past year. So it doesn't take a lot of employment to bring the unemployment rate down in Wheeler County. So for several months now, they've had the lowest unemployment rate in the state. Labor force trends. Okay, so these are Lane County job vacancies, and they're done quarterly. These are private sector job vacancies, and we do a survey, and it's thousands of employers, and we ask them, do you have a vacancy? Is it difficult to fill? Since the pandemic, the level of those classified as difficult to fill has come up. This past summer, though, vacancies were down 28% compared to the summer of 2022. And we're back down to a situation where there were roughly 1 vacancy per unemployed person. And that's down from 1.1 in the summer of 22. We go back to 2021, there were times when we had 2.5 unemployed vacancies per unemployed person. It's a very tight labor market. At the national level, we saw quits go up because there were so many vacancies and so few unemployed people that they could take a job, and then if they saw another better one, they could just quit and go to the next one. Quits are down now. So by this measure, the labor market is starting to loosen up a little bit. Hasn't showed up in the unemployment rate yet, but this is maybe an early indicator that things are loosening up in the labor market. So labor supply going forward, we have to talk about retirement. You can see here 2016 to 2019, the reason that a person is not in the labor force because of retirement grew by 21%. It's since leveled off, but it's at that higher level. And that higher level is expected to keep on going for a while until the baby boomers start clearing out a little bit, and then we get then that'll come down, and we'll have a higher labor force participation rate. Lane County's share of workers 55 plus is 25%. It's about the same as the state of Oregon. So that means that a quarter of our labor force will likely be retiring in the next 10 to 15 years. And it's a challenge replacing those workers. So this is population growth by natural increase or net migration. So there's been a lot of talk about in-migration slowing down, and whether it's just because of the recession or if that's kind of a new normal. This data is from Portland State University, and so back in the 1990s we had both natural increase, natural growth, and net migration of about 3,000. In the next decade, these are decadal averages, 2001 to 2010, net migration was down to about 2,000. You'll remember the Great Recession was in there, and during recessions, people don't move as much. Net migration to Oregon typically goes down during a recession. Then in the 20-teens, back up to about 3,000, but you'll notice that natural increase is dropping off. And in fact, in that decade of the 20-teens, it's actually a -30 there. It just doesn't show up on the graph very well because it's so small. But natural increase has been dropping off. So now we have 2021 and 2022, and that's a 2-year average. Natural increase is way down, and we had the pandemic recession, so people aren't moving, and net migration is back down to 2,000. I'll say right here that this is Portland State University data, and there's a discrepancy between what the U.S. Census Bureau says about Lane County and Oregon and what Portland State University says. I think it was in 2021, Lane County and Oregon actually had negative net migration. So Portland State actually had a positive. And then in 2022, Census Bureau has very little net migration, and the natural increases or natural growth is way negative. So we'll see who's right there as time goes by. There'll be some revisions and some review. And then here in 2023, we have employment growth in Lane County of about 2,000. And you can bet natural increase hasn't come back up. So most of that is going to be from net migration. But we don't have that breakout yet. It'll be coming later this year. But to me, it's looking like net migration just goes down during when you have a recession, and then it comes back up to that more normal 2,000 to 3,000 a year. But this is one we're just going to have to wait and see. And because natural increase is way down, Oregon and Lane County depend on in-migration to grow our labor force. Okay, we can't talk about labor issues without talking about remote work. And when it's possible, is very popular. So this is really about what workers think about remote work. So where do remote capable employees expect to work long-term, and where do they prefer to work? So, before the pandemic, they expected to work in an office. Afterwards, the expectations go more towards remote and exclusively remote and hybrid. And then this last one is the preference. So, if you're an employer and you're trying to hire people, if you can at all offer them some remote work, it's a very big incentive benefit to get employees to come when you're trying to hire people. Again, this is remote capable, so this is people that spend most of their time on the computer, accountants, economists, people like that. So, but according to the Census Bureau, in 2022, working from home, Lane County was 15%, Oregon was 20%, and the U.S. was 15%. Before the pandemic, it was about 5%. And also, Portland metro area has a very high level of workers working from home at about 30%. And then you can see here, we have an article that touches on the subject on our Quality Info website. Housing affordability. I realize most of you guys are commercial, but we do have some statistics about housing affordability. I'll say right now, the Consumer Price Index came out today, and it ticked up from 3.1 to 3.4. The major component that's keeping inflation elevated is housing. So housing, or shelter, they call it, the shelter index is up, I think it was 6.7% over the year, while inflation overall is at 3.4%. So bringing down or leveling off or slowing the increase of shelter costs is really important to getting inflation down. So this is from Zillow, and their rent index, seasonally adjusted. So rent increased after the pandemic restrictions were lifted and is now leveling off. So you can see during the pandemic, there were restrictions on increasing rent and kicking people out, foreclosures and things like that. Afterwards, property managers and landowners made up for lost time. And so we saw large increases in rent up until just recently, really. And now it's starting to level off. For the sake of the inflation rate, let's hope it and for people, let's hope it stays leveled off for a while. This is interesting. This is the home cost to income ratio. So this is the price, the average price of a home, or median price of a home in an area, divided by median annual income. This is gross median income, so it's before taxes or anything like that. So how many years of annual median income would it take to purchase a home? And all that is the annual ratio. So if we look at this, first of all, these are most of the areas in Oregon. And Eugene Springfield MSA, which is Lane County, is about middle of the pack. it's kind of interesting, you have these lifestyle areas in Bend and Hood River where people are moving and buying houses, but they're not moving there for a job. They're going there and buying a house and creating demand for services and retails, for generally low-paying jobs. So you kind of have the double whammy of raising housing prices and creating low-paying jobs, so median income stays low. And similar to Grants Pass and Medford, I was just talking to a realtor the other day down in Southwest Oregon, and he's like, yeah, people are still hiring in California, moving to our area, buying houses. It drives up the cost of the houses, but really doesn't add a lot to the median income because they just create demand for services mostly. So that's a problem. You know, that creates a problem with housing affordability in Oregon. One problem with that is you may have jobs, but you may not get people to come in if they perceive that it's not an affordable area for them. As we go down the line, as I said, Lane County is pretty much middle of the pack in Oregon, but we're way above the United States. So housing affordability is a problem in Oregon, and it might put a damper on immigration, and therefore labor supply. Lane County residential building permits are down in 2023, and it's estimated it takes about 1,400 units a year to keep up with population growth. And so in 21 and 22, we were doing that. We were way over. But in 23, we're down a little bit. The 23 number is through November, so you can probably tack on another 100 or so. And that gets us up close to that 1,400 threshold. Either way, over the past few years, we've been doing much better than we were doing coming out of the Great Recession. You know, back here in the Great Recession, 2009, 2007, and even coming out of the Great Recession, building permits were low. So we're making up for some lost ground over the past couple of years. Okay, these are the forecasts. So the first one is a short-term forecast from the Office of Economic Analysis. So the Employment Department does long-term forecasts, and they're based on determining demand, mostly for training issues, to make decisions about training. The Oregon Office of Economic Analysis does the revenue forecast, so they have to do a short-term forecast. Right now, the baseline is soft landing. And what a soft landing is when you have high inflation and you raise interest rates to bring down demand and lower the rate of inflation. The soft landing is when you do that and don't send us into a recession. That's what the baseline is now. The alternative is a recession, and a lot of that has to do with what the Federal Reserve does with interest rates. If they leave them elevated too long, that could send us into a recession. If they bring them down too early, that could heat up the economy and cause higher inflation, in which case they'd have to raise interest rates back up and send us into a recession. So this soft landing is kind of a unique thing. It doesn't happen much, but it looks like we're in a situation where it might happen. So this is Lane County employment projected for the next 10 years, we're at 2032. And it's expected to increase by 10% overall. Total employment is expected to add 16,800 jobs. So this forecast, we do this forecast every year. And each year that we get farther away from the pandemic recession, this 10-year growth rate slows down because we're getting away from the recovery period of the recession. So a lot of these industries have had their recovery from the recession, and they're going forward with structural growth. These projections are demand-based within a labor force restraint. So what we're looking at here is health services expected to add the most, add the most and grow the fastest. You know, just an aging and growing population creates a lot of demand for health services. Leisure and hospitality, there's still some pandemic recovery left in leisure and hospitality, but also a growing population and also retirements probably help leisure and hospitality a little bit because people travel and eat out a little more in retirement if they can afford it. In information, there's a lot of tech in there. So software and data processing are in there. We expect there to be a lot of demand for that. Construction, there's some dollars, some state and federal dollars coming down for infrastructure and for housing, and also the cost of housing puts some demand on to build houses, and so that puts some demand on construction. And then professional and business services, you know, beyond the call centers, there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's architecture and engineering is in there. Also the sciences, both physical and social science, research and development. And then there's also computer systems design in there. So we're expecting to see some growth from that. So on down the line, the main point of this graph is that most industries are expected to add jobs over the 10-year period. And we match Oregon this time. Oregon statewide is expected to increase by 10% also.
Which area do you think is going to increase the most in the
Which area of the state? We have the Portland metro area and Bend. For different reasons, obviously. The Portland metro area has got a big Amazon warehouse coming in. That's really kind of juicing employment up there. Also the CHIPS Act likely helped a couple of companies up there. There's a lot of reasons the Portland metro area would grow. And then Bend is just expected to continue attracting people for lifestyle. So that's growing their economy. And the least, some of the, like Eastern Oregon is expected not to grow as much. Southwestern Oregon, I think, is probably the slowest growing at about 6%.
Are you talking about Curry County area?
Yeah, Coos, Curry, and Douglas. It's just an older population, a lot, the retirees are moving in, but there really isn't a lot besides tourism going on. There's, a little bit, there's fishing, logging, but not a whole lot compared to other areas of the state. Yeah.
I've understood that, or heard that Maersk is looking at Coos Bay. Is there any, anything?
I'm sorry, what?
Maersk, the shipping company,
Yeah.
is looking at Coos Bay.
Yeah.
You can kind of fill in where the Bird Cove project fell out. I don't know. That would have been
Yes, and that's what growth there is in Southwest Oregon. There's a couple of things going on there. Roseburg Forest Products has several, I think it's $170 million expansion for some of the mills down in Riddle and I think one in Coos County. And also Coos Bay is getting an expansion, and I mean we're talking some pretty big container ships coming in out of there. So it's looking like there's going to be some growth there.
Would that bleed over, if they're bringing in container ships there, is that going to bleed over into other locations for like warehousing, transportation?
Yeah. I believe that is to be kind of an outlet for other areas of the country. I think they're talking about sending whatever comes in there more to the Midwest than the West Coast, because you have Seattle, San Francisco, and Palm Beach pretty much taking care of the West Coast. I think the idea there is to be an outlet for the interior of the United States. So yeah, it'll create some warehousing, but it's pretty much they're offloading and going inland.
Brian, I find that federal government growth rate at 0 to be hard to believe.
Yeah.
I don't live in fantasy land.
Well, neither do we. The federal spending, as I said before. Lucky you if you do. Yeah, the federal spending, as I said before, and the state spending, you know, it works its way down to the local level. So the government employment growth that we're seeing because of that additional spending is largely at the local government level where those programs are implemented. So, you know, it's like the feds send the money to the states send it to localities, but the localities are required to enact, you know, what those dollars are supposed to do, and that's where we're seeing the employment growth. In federal government, the Postal Service is getting more efficient. We're expecting to see some job losses there. That would be countered somewhat by, there's a little bit of growth in fire suppression in both federal and state government, not a whole lot. Okay, this is on the occupational level. So for the occupational categories here, it's basically the biggest ones are adding the most jobs. What's important about this, though, is that the gold bars on the end are net growth. And that's what we saw with the industries before the previous one. So net growth is very small as it comes to job openings compared to replacement openings. And replacement openings happen when somebody leaves the labor force, largely through retirements or transfers. And that could be through somebody, you know, they're working as a waiter or waitress, they finish their degree, and they go get a job as an economist. That's a transfer. They stay in the labor force, but create an opening. It can also happen through advancement, and that can be related to retirements also. The point to this is that going forward, because of all these replacement openings, there's a lot of opportunity for people. There's a lot of opportunity for people if you have the right training, and if you have good soft skills. Just going forward over the next 10 years, there's a lot of opportunity. Okay, so I'm kind of required to put this in here. If you ever have the opportunity to participate in the BLS survey, do so. The more the merrier. The more people we have participating in the BLS survey or the census, the higher the sample and the lower the error range. So it makes these statistics more accurate, and it makes for better decision making when we have more accurate statistics. So if you have the opportunity, please participate in these surveys. And here's my contact information, and we'll take questions. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
What sort of factors do you consider whenever you look at the labor forecast? Is it purely like data and trends, or are you also thinking about other things for the 10-year forecast?
Yeah, for the forecast, well, first of all, you know, we kind of do a regression from past to current. But beyond that, we're making adjustments based on expected demand. So is technology going to make this industry less labor intensive? So we'll chalk it down a little bit. You know, for instance, is Amazon going to build a big warehouse? So for warehousing, we'll take the employment up a little bit. So, you know, we use you know, logic and then things we know are going to happen to try and determine future demand. And as I said before, that's all within a labor force constraint. You know, do we have the workers to fulfill that demand? And so that's basically how the forecast is made.
Historically, how accurate are you?
At the total employment level, we're not bad. At the industry level, it gets a little dicey. We've been pretty good about healthcare. It's a big industry, you know, the demand is there and it happens. It's been happening. Some of the other industries, you know, sometimes things don't happen that we expect to happen. Sometimes things do happen that we don't expect to happen. It's like, you know, the call centers, they seem like they were pretty much set here, but all of a sudden, you know, we have outsourcing and we have technology that reduces them. Then we have a pandemic where everybody finds out they can work from home. So, you know, 10 years ago, we might have said, yeah, call centers are gonna be fine, they'll probably be, growing the population or something like that. But, yeah, there are exogenous shocks that happen within these industry sectors that sometimes throw them off. But as I said, healthcare we've been pretty good with. We got that one, and we got total employment, pretty much direction, up and down and magnitude, how much, total employment, we got that. And with a few industries, we're pretty accurate, but it's kind of hit and miss at the industry level. Yeah.
Have you started to incorporate into the predictions the potential impacts of AI on specific industries?
We've done that to some extent. So to the extent that AI is going to reduce employment, it's kind of iffy right now. So, people use AI to write their term papers. That's pretty much just a good search engine that puts it all together for you. But there are other things that they're looking at with AI, like AI being able to write its own software, original software, or, do medical research. If it gets to be where it's doing that competently, that could have a real effect on the labor force where, jobs that use human judgment that we thought, well, that's pretty safe because it needs human judgment. If AI starts to be able to do that competently, then we could see some loss of employment. We'll see. So far, I'm not that impressed. Yeah. Yeah.
You said there's like 25% employment that's 55 plus. Do you have any idea or data on how that's segmented in different employment categories? It's kind of like the people that are coming out of this versus that.
Some of the older, we have industry by age, and some of the more traditional manufacturing, truck driving, are two that I can think of that have an older workforce. Everybody's feeling it a little bit. Construction too. Everybody's feeling the aging of the population a little bit, but a lot of those traditional goods producing, transportation, have an older population, and they're having a real hard time replacing those older people as they move on. To some extent, those jobs might not be so popular with kids these days. They feel like they've got to go to college and become a professional.
I've heard that a lot of people just don't want to work. They don't want to go to work. They'd rather stay home.
Well, yeah, they might find it easier to work. But yeah, your point, a lot of the more traditional industries and occupations have an older workforce. And, we're really working, Plain Workforce Partnership does training for the county. And they're really working like with the construction industry, transportation, manufacturing, food products in particular, but also food products, to train people, get them into those positions, to try and replace some of the older workers that are leaving.
Do you have any data on difference for where a person lives and where they work? And if there's any changes in that, so you can see commute patterns within Oregon?
Obviously.
What I'm looking at is, I looked at Junction City up here where they're building like 400, 500 houses.
Yeah.
And my first question to myself was, where are these people gonna work? Are they gonna commute to Salem, or where?
So, a lot of the population growth has been outside of Eugene, Springfield. Junction City, Bonita, Creswell have had housing developments, and they're becoming vendor communities to Eugene. Then obviously we have people working from home. We've gone from 5% to 15%. That's a pretty big chunk of the labor force that's now pretty much working from home. So there is that also. Yeah.
Earlier you talked about migration patterns when that migration to the state goes down when there's a recession. I apologize if I missed this. Is there a reason why it works like that?
Well, obviously during the pandemic, everybody just stayed at home, so they're not migrating. Yeah, during recessions, you would think people might migrate to where the jobs are. During recessions, at least in Oregon, we just don't see as much in-migration. There have been a couple of factors in Oregon, like wildfires that might keep people away. Housing affordability has gotten bad, and a lot of times people won't move to an area and take a job if they don't perceive it as affordable for them. So those are kind of the factors that are affecting net migration. Yeah.
Any effect of the minimum wage?
Yeah. There was probably some employment loss due to the increase in minimum wage. Employers, of course, that's on the lower end. A lot of employers were able to kind of move some of the cost into prices. Also create efficiencies, less people doing the same amount of work. So there wasn't a huge drop off of employment because of the minimum wage increase. And actually, because of the increase, some of the lower end employers were able to get people with more experience in education.
I've always heard that we do a real good job of educating them, losing our talent.
Oh, yeah.
Do you track how many of those kids that come here for education or from here, getting education that are from here, end up leaving just because opportunities are so poor?
Yes, we've looked into that. We've looked into similar college towns. We have one of the lowest retention rates of graduates. The average time after graduation is 5 years. And if you look at our wages, wages for entry-level positions where there are degrees from the University of Oregon are lower than almost anywhere in the country, like a legal assistant, in business or finance. Those entry-level positions in our county, those wages are very low because there's a huge supply. So yeah, you're right. We don't really retain a lot of people graduating from the University of Oregon.
Go ahead, Ellen. Oh, this kind of feels like a question about the work in local government. What makes an industry ripe for growth? So I imagine it's like economic demands and like people wanting to spend money in that industry, but from my perspective, is there anything that we can do to like support the growth of certain industries with policy or regulation or?
One thing, I've been on a lot of site selection committees. So if a company is shopping around for a site to put their widget factory or to move to or build something, and really labor availability is like the main problem that we would have in that. A lot of times we'll come in second to an urban area, and it's just because there's more labor, more unemployed people, larger labor force. It's just sheer numbers and not necessarily anything else. Yeah, when it comes to that sort of economic development, infrastructure counts too. We've been getting some high-speed cable into the area, and that's helped to develop some of the high-tech companies. That cable is really, we've had a lot of growth in like software data processing, but they're small companies. They're just startups, and they only, they grow to be 5, 10 people, and that's it. But it's good to see that that's happening because of that infrastructure. Yeah.
You see, with the University of Oregon and Oregon State, their incubation programs, are you seeing anything come out of that as far as employment and growth and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a help. What's that small nuclear company that's based at Oregon State? It's small nuclear energy. New something. They just had a layoff anyway. But things like that are coming out of the universities. You have the Knight Science Center to get research out, medical research out, commercialized. So we're expecting that that's going to bear some fruit going forward. So yeah, you do see some things coming out of the universities that become commercial, but it's difficult. You'd think there'd be some more. I don't know if either university really promotes entrepreneurialism. I know when I was there, you have these like the economics club, And, they wanna look at the latest tricky way that you can figure something out, but you don't hear much about how are we gonna get that out to the public, how are we gonna make money off of it. So maybe, just a little more internal promotion of entrepreneurial and some of the things that they're coming up with.
I'm kind of curious about the timber industry a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, we actually have slight growth in wood products manufacturing. In logging, we continue to see technology kind of make it less labor intensive, just more machinery out there, you need less people. But in the manufacturing, Oregon does have a competitive advantage in plywood, mass timber, kind of structural, glulam. We pretty much invented that, and we have some advantage there. So we have growth in engineered wood products and plywood going forward. It's small growth, but it's still there in the forecast.
What about wineries and cannabis? Has that
Yeah.
slowed down?
not huge employers. The wine is a little more labor intensive, but a lot of that labor is, goes through a staffing agency. I need the grapes picked on this certain day within these certain hours, and so they rush a bunch of people out there, trimming. But it's kind of short term. Mass labor goes out there, does it, and pulls back. With cannabis, it doesn't take much to grow a lot of pot and sell it. Not a lot of labor.
Well, it just seems like there's less.
There's like all these brand new stores.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
And now it kind of just feels like
Right. Well, as I said, it doesn't take a lot of people to grow a lot of cannabis. And, we overgrew in a big way. So the price dropped way down, and people are having a hard time making money. And actually, I'm kind of surprised a lot of the dispensaries continue to hang in there. The profit margin can't be a whole lot. So, and we'll see. We're looking at making the profits from sales of cannabis able to be use it in the banking system. That might help there too, because a lot of people who are making money on cannabis, couldn't put it in the bank, so they're buying real estate or investing it elsewhere. Great questions. I think that's it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Today.
Sure.
And I will be emailing out the PowerPoint as well as the PowerPoint for the next